Hi, everyone. Oh, it's so great to see familiar faces. Hi. So this is going to be a fast half an hour, so I'm going to jump into it. I was just saying before we all got on the call, like, we haven't even opened up all of the things that we could possibly talk about. So I thought we could focus on Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, because I love the Noah story, and I think that's also very fascinating. But I think it gets the primary light. We don't always look at Migdal Bavel, and there's a lot in that. And especially when we look at Torah, because we come to Torah every year, and it's certainly got different messages depending on like what's going on in the world. I think Migdal Bavel is a story that we need to pay attention to for this moment that we're living in. So let's start with blessing our learning, that it should reveal itself to us with our traditional Torah study bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Holy One of blessing, may these words of Torah be ever sweet and appealing to our eyes, and may their secrets reveal themselves to us in this moment so that we can metabolize them and bring them to life in our world and our experiences. And may they implant themselves into our being so that we can share them with our children, our children's children, our students, our teachers, our neighbors, anyone whose lives we touch. We should be able to share a bit of the Torah of our being with them. And may we always be blessed to have the privilege to study Torah Lishma, to study Torah just because we love to learn Torah and we love to be in community for its own sake. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. All right. So Julie dropped the link in the chat, and would it be helpful to do a screen share? Is that helpful? Okay, I'm going to do a screen share. Let me pull it up, and then I will share my screen. Nope, that's Zoom. Wrong one. You don't want to see yourselves. Share. Okay, here we go. So, so the question down below that, I wonder when we encounter Migdal Bavel is, what did the people do? Like, what was really their crime? What made God so angry? Because this is the story, right? Like, it's just these 9 verses. It's all we get. Okay, so everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them hard." Bricks serve them as stone, and bitumen serve them as mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build us a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for ourselves. Else we shall be scattered all over the world." The Lord came down to look at the city and tower that man had built. And the Lord said, "If, as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Let us then go down and confound their speech there, so that they shall not understand one another's speech." Thus the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Bavel, because there the Lord confounded the speech of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Great. So we can look at this on a lot of different levels. One level is like, what is the purpose of this story here? Well, we just had the flood story, and we learned that like everybody on earth was destroyed except for Noach and his family, and then people went out from there. And so one of the questions is like, okay, well, if everybody is from the same family, well, then why do we all speak different languages? How did that happen? So the Torah says, "Fear not. Here's a story to explain that." Right? So that's the purpose of this story in this moment. It's great. We see how we get from one place to another, and this is how we became different peoples. Excellent. So let's look at, though, what is the effect of coming to different languages. Everyone on the earth had the same language and the same words. How amazing would that be? You know, people always say, like, if you could have one magic power, what would it be? I think my magic power that I would want would be to speak like every language so I could understand everyone in the world. But like with things that we are given, like the ability to understand everyone in the world at this time, like you don't appreciate it, right? We all know that we appreciate things that we've had to work for much more than we appreciate things that we're given, because it shows our hard work that we've put blood, sweat, and tears into whatever it is. Okay, so then they have the bricks that serve them as stone and the bitumen which serve them as mortar, right? So it's like this is this and this is that. So that means that this is new technology for them. And technology is just, you know, we think about it as cell phones and whatever, but really technology is something that helps you do something better, something that helps you do something differently. So these bricks and bitumen is new technology. So they're like, oh, all right, we're taking it up to the next level here with this new building material. And already when we get new technology, we feel like we're so much better than like the whatever that came before us, because now we've got this newfangled thing, right? And like it already starts to chip away at our humility. And they said, come, let us make a city, and our top is going to be up in the sky, right? And anytime we encounter anything with the sky and thinking about our ancestors who, you know, thought about the God up there, it's like, oh, they're coming for God, or something is going on with their relationship with God. And we notice in the story that God is absent, right? God is not talking to anyone. No one's talking about God. It's just, right, we're going up to the sky. And why are we going up there? We're going to go make a name for ourselves. Else we shall be scattered all over the world. Because you remember, like that was the whole purpose. God said, you know, go ahead, you're free now, go re-inhabit the whole earth, because right, everything had been destroyed. But these people said, you know what? I don't think I want to do that. I think we should stay right here where we are and make a name for ourselves. So the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower that man had built. And, you know, I think even right there, it's just a little zets, right? Like they made this tower, they were building it to the sky, and they were like, we're going to go up to God. And the text says, and then God still had to come down, right? Because they're not able to reach the realms of the divine, right? And that's the message of that even if they had the highest tower in the world, it wouldn't reach the heavenly realms, because that's not, that's inaccessible even at this time. So the tower that man had built, that humanity had built. And it's so interesting that it says this word, Adam, right? Because it's not that the people had built, that the builders had built, that the residents have done. It's, you know, it's standing for the chutzpah of humanity. And so God says, if as one people with one language for all, this is how they've begun to act, then nothing that they propose will be out of their reach, right? And it's like, there was no conversation, right? There was nothing will be out of their reach. I think it means in a bad way, right? And it's that conversation that we're having of, just because we can do something doesn't mean that we necessarily should do something, right? And there was none of that, like, hey, you know, we have this new technology, we can build these, we have the ability to build a tower that can go Shemaima. Should we, all the way up to the skies? Should we, right? Like, and I think that's something that often is missing even today, right? So this is why I feel like, you know, this is one of those things that's speaking to us. Just because we can do something, should we do it? Because with our capabilities, if we do it, we're going to do it, and nothing will be out of our limits. So let us, who is us? Who is God's consort that God is talking to in this sentence? We're not even going to go there, but that's a whole other fascinating conversation. Let us then go down and confound their speech there, so that they shall not understand one another's speech, right? That's the consequence. We're going to go down and confound them so they don't understand each other's speech. And then they stopped building the city, and I don't know if the city was destroyed. These are my questions just reading the pshat of the text. Was the city destroyed, or did they just move on from there? We don't know. The text doesn't tell us. And then they got scattered all over the planet. And that's why it's called Bavel, obviously, because that's where God confounded the speech of the whole people. And from there, they went and were scattered all over the place of the face of the earth. And Bavel, in Hebrew, it means to confuse, to be confused. And now we translate, we talk about babbling, and it's just like this unintelligible speech. Okay. Oh, I left out one quick thing about the tower. We didn't. It fits in fine here. So the tower in Mesopotamian culture, it's called a ziggurat, was the highest point of the city, right? So it's like, come, let's make us a city, and we'll make a ziggurat. That makes sense. But the purpose of the ziggurat was that it should be like the axis mundi, right? Like the thing that connects the heavens and the earth. In a place of encountering God. But in this story, it's like, it's more of a, we're going up to get God. We're going to make our own God. We're going to be our own gods, right? We've got all of this technology, this in their sense. And that, that whole line of thought is fascinating, and you should absolutely check out Understanding Genesis by Nahum Sarna for following the Mesopotamian significance of what it means for them to build this ziggurat. Okay, so we're going to jump into the Midrash, and that's, let me scroll down a little bit. Here's our Midrash. That's our question. So in thinking about changes in technology and how we do things, how do those modern sensibilities make it seem that God is farther away from us, and what brings us back, right? Because I don't want to say like what brings God closer to us, but what brings us back, right? Like how do we cover that distance between ourselves and where we perceive God to be? Okay, so this text here is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. And that's where it's the best place to find all of the Midrashim on a story put together in a great way. So the tower had reached such a height that it took a whole year to hoist up necessary building material to the top. In consequence, materials became so valuable. The stuff that they were using was so valuable that they cried over the bricks when they fell and broke, but they remained indifferent when a person fell and was killed, right? It's like, and this translates now into our culture as this idea of production, that people are valued based on what they can produce, and not necessarily valued just for who they are. We see that more here in the next part. They behaved also very heartlessly toward the weak and the sick, who could not assist to any great extent in the building, right? They totally disregarded those who could not contribute from their perspective to this major project, to the physical building of this project. They would not even allow a woman in travail to leave the work. And I read that and I thought, oh yeah, that's like, how we don't have paid maternity leave in this country, right? Like there's just this constant drive to produce, to create, to use the technology, to drive, to build, to create a name for ourselves. What do we do with all of that? I'm going to jump down. I'm going to skip this part here because we only have so much time. So this city here is being painted as a place where God is not present, right? Like this is not the way that people who have a closeness to God treat other people who are also created b'Tselem Elohim, that they understand are created in the image of God. And this is not, the world that God desires. So Ismar Shorsh wrote in this fantastic commentary from years ago, that hasn't expired, on Parashat Noach, God is less accessible in a man-made world. Surrounded by monuments of our own ingenuity, we grow deaf to the echoes of eternity. In the biblical tale, God's voice is conspicuously absent. In the face of human arrogance, God withdraws to the most remote corner of the cosmos, hence the desire to storm the heavens. The breakdown in communication can be restored by human effort. So, that brings us back to that first part of like, we take for granted things that are easy. We take for granted things that are given to us. But with human effort, actually going out of our way, we bridge that gap. We create those lines of communication. And that effort is, also what brings the divine, what brings us closer to the divine through that work, through that avodah, right? That holy service of connecting with others in God's world. So where does this idea come from? This idea of oneness and the crime, I should say, of the oneness, the same language and the same words. When I approached this story this year, I'm in school and I'm taking a fantastic class called the nature of inquiry, and it's teaching us how to investigate our thoughts, where they come from, and how we know what we know to be true is actually true. Like, where does that truth come from? Whose stories are we taking into ourselves? So when I read this story of this oneness, I said, oh my gosh, this sounds so much like Plato and the Platonic ideal. So I want to present this Platonic ideal as excerpted from another piece on pluralism, which we'll get to. So in the first place, that as in the sciences, all genuine questions must have one true answer and one only, all the rest being necessarily errors, right? And that's true. That's like a scientific method. Like, we're looking for the one answer, the one way, the one thing, the one way that this can be done, and everything else is not correct. There's one way to do it. That's why, it goes back to there was no conversation of just because we can do this, should we do this? What are the ramifications? How are we, are there other ways that we can approach this problem? No, there's one way. In the second place, that there must be a dependable path towards the discovery of these truths, right? There's one way to discover what that singular answer is. And in the third place, that the true answers, when found, must necessarily be compatible with one another and form a single whole. For the truth cannot be incompatible with another that we knew a priori. Right? So when we discover whatever those true answers are, that singular answer that we've been searching for, it can't contradict something we already know, right? Because then that would not be one of the true answers, right? So that makes no room in the world, in this idea, for paradox, right? It makes no room for that tension, this and this is true, which is such a Jewish thing, right? Elu ve'elu, right? These and these are words of the living God. We're able to exist in the paradox, exist in the tension. And in fact, the word Yisrael, struggling with God, I always translate that as the tension. It's like the tension of living in God is that there is a diversity. There are many perspectives. There's many ways of doing things, right? But that's also my modern sensibility, because I call myself pluralist. In this fantastic class that I'm taking, we got to study the roots of pluralism. So I want to present that because I think it's a little challenging now that we're also trying to move back to a place of oneness in theory. How do we do that in a truly pluralist society? So my question for us, and then I'll stop talking and we can open it up after we get to this text is it possible to be truly pluralist today? And what are the limits of pluralism in the face of toxic morality? Right, especially in the people of Bavel, who have very different priorities from, I would say from I see it with my modern eyes, right? They're all about production. So again, this is from Isaiah Berlin's The Idea of Pluralism. And he writes, members of one culture can, by the force of imaginative insight, understand the values and ideals, the forms of life of another culture or society, even those remote in time or space. They may find these values unacceptable, but if they open their minds sufficiently, they can grasp how one might be a full human being with whom one could communicate, and at the same time live in the light values widely different, live in the light, which is values widely different from one's own, but which nevertheless one can see to be values, ends of life, by the realization of which men could be fulfilled. I'm sorry, this is like such gendered language. So that as people, and as people of different cultures, we can have vastly different ways of life. We can have vastly different ways of approaching things. But because we're able to recognize that these are people, and that we have, that people can find meaning in doing things differently, that people can find meaning in different gods, different religious practices, different life paths, we're able to connect with them. We're able to communicate with them. It's not like, oh, well, that's just those people over there and that's how they do things. It's that those people over there share something that I have as well, and we can communicate across those lines. He continues further down the page, intercommunication between cultures in time and space, right? In time, like we're able to have this communication back with like Migdal Bavel, and space, right? Like here where we are, is only possible because what makes men human is common to them and acts as a bridge between them. But our values are ours and theirs are theirs, etc. I think that's enough. Yeah. So like when we can tap into the common humanity amongst people of different thoughts, of different values, etc., then we're able to truly have communication. So this spoke to me because we're in the midst of an election, and it's I think that's just putting it mildly. We are so divided in this nation, and so divided over so many things. How is it really possible to be pluralist today? And what are the limits? Is it possible to say like, well, that person has certain values that they value, and they have a different set of morality, and I can communicate with them because we're still human, and that's what connects us? But what are the limits of that pluralism, especially in the face of a morality that's like toxic and really really goes against what we believe in what we feel in our kishkas, or what we know a priori? How do we deal with that? And how do we behave not as the generation of Migdal Bavel, but as people who are really trying to embrace the multitude of opinions and views? And I think we can open it up now, and I'll check the chat as well. If you want to jump into the conversation, come on in.
Lots of comments in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm reading them. Sounds like God is jealous and afraid. That's interesting. Yeah. The character of God is a fascinating one as God develops in the Tanakh. And like what does that mean, that when the power, really, there's another way of reading the story. What does it mean when the power structure is being changed from the bottom up? What does that mean for the top to then feel that threat, and how do they put the kibosh on the challenges to their threat? That's a fantastic way of reading that. The technology caused them to lose the art of communication. That's big. Yeah. And that's, worth thinking about, like what have we lost, especially now in the times that we're living in, and what have we gained with this new technology that we are forced to embrace? I wouldn't call it they lost. Someone said they wouldn't call it they lost, they just made it new. So we had new languages. It's interesting. Yeah. The new languages shifted that art of communication. So, and the new languages themselves became a new technology. We were talking about, technology as that which helps us do something better or differently. I'm seeing disappointment. Reba's saying, I'm disappointed that they were unable to communicate despite different languages. Since everyone is working on the same task, I don't understand why they could not even convey messages to each other. It's fascinating. That really speaks to this idea of morals, right? Like, if everyone's working on the same task, but this is a very concrete physical thing, and we think that we all share the same morals and the same values. Like, are we all working on the same task, the human project, or are we working on different sides of it? Shows that unity is not always for the best. Unity, but at what cost or outcome? Absolutely. Absolutely. It is a parable. Yes. It's a parable. I think many of our, especially the things of prehistory or the stories pre-Avraham, because they're shared with many other cultures. Although Sarna was saying that there's not a parallel of this in like Mesopotamian culture, but a lot of the prehistory, there are comparable stories, meaning that this is Torah with a little t that's being shared, the teaching and learning and like the essential truths that are being shared among different cultures. It's not as if when we travel that we change our language. So I don't know how scattering would achieve what God wanted. It's a good question. It's not as if when we travel, we change our language. It's true. And, as the nations grow up, then you have many more people who know the language, and we're back at square one. And you have like all of this country wanting to fight this, this country, and like this different nations that do speak the same language. That's a good point. And we remember that, like, this is, from my perspective, this is answering questions, right? So these are people who are fallible in their bringing those answers to the forefront. Tombs and temples are the two places where heaven and earth intersect. That's cool. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Julie, for putting that book in there. Everyone knows warning against totality. Someone said, Nina said, I read an analysis that explains this story as a warning against totalitarianism. I think that like is connected to what someone said before about, like, if we flip it and read it as like the people coming together to like stand up for their freedom and like burst through the change of a dominating authority. I think it's fascinating. I have never thought about it like that, and I'm so glad that you both brought this up. I'm going to start thinking about it like that and go look and see what that, if you could send that analysis, I'd love to read it. Diversity should be encouraged. I think that's, the message of this story. Oh, that's cool. Bricks and mortar were an affliction to the Bnei Israel in Egypt. That's cool. Yeah. And then like that, so now they're using it and they're taking it to do something else with it. Oh my gosh, there's so many great comments here. When we define ourselves by productivity, that seems a direct undermining of God's intention for mankind. Absolutely. Absolutely. That we should be valued. And Nina continues, that we should be valued for being human. And that we have dignity and worth simply by being created in God's image. And, this is coming to the forefront for us from those who are experiencing disability and looking at the challenges of their lives that are like built in to the way the world is created, like with sidewalks and just thinking about mobile abilities, and being able to, the way that people are valued for production and contribution as opposed to just being recognized B'Tselem Elohim. And I think I'm so glad that we're living in a time where these things are being foregrounded and we're able to have these very important conversations. I'm not going to have time to get through all of these. Let's see. We covered that already. Is there anything in the chat or anything that's not in the chat, because you all have access to it, that you want to bring to this conversation before we end? I see we're already over time. I told you the half hour was going to fly by. As they were working together as a unit. Oh, Mike asks the enduring question. I still don't understand why they were punished. They were working together. And it's true. And I think the things that we're saying lead into, why they were punished. And perhaps we should think of it not necessarily as a punishment, but as a tweak to their behavior. In that it's like, oh, if this is, we create systems and we see how they're running. And it's like, oh, that's not going to work out so well. let me change this and see what this outcome is. In that, pushing humanity to have to work to get to know each other. I'm not married to that. I'm happy to be challenged on that, but that's it's a line of thinking that could possibly explain that. The objective was to make a name for themselves in the contrast to what Hashem told Abraham. Well, it's interesting what Tanya's saying, that the objective was to make a name for themselves in contrast to what Hashem told Abraham. And that's exactly true, because Abraham's coming next. And they are working to do that. They're working to make their name for themselves and to give themselves a name. Whereas with Abraham had his name made for him. Abraham was given a new name. So it's interesting to consider, like, what are these things that we struggle for, like this definition, and fight to build for ourselves instead of waiting and living and seeing what becomes. All right. It's like a project of vanity. Yeah, for sure. I think there are major difficulties between opposing factions of our society and those of the world in general. It seems like pluralism is a worthy goal, but if it means accepting that which one considers evil, there is the paradox. It's true. And I wonder, what are these limits of plurality? Like, when do we have to stand up and say, like, no, you were just absolutely wrong? And it said, what's his name? Berlin says, like, we're free to criticize. So I think he's not saying that, like, we have to just accept what people, or how people think differently and how people live differently and act and believe. But I think, like, we have to understand that they are human and that their beliefs and their values lead them to be fulfilled. And, like, that is really puzzling to me, to think, like, how do I connect with someone whose values, whose ends, who's, like, what leads them to be fulfilled in this life is, like, what I perceive as injustice for so many people. It's very challenging. It's very challenging. Let's see. Right. Oh my goodness. This is, oh, thanks. Nina is letting us know that for more information on totalitarianism, we can look at Shai Held's first volume of The Heart of Torah. It's fascinating. It's interesting, Steve writes, it's interesting to know that language development begins before birth. Towards the end of pregnancy, a fetus begins to hear sounds and speech coming from outside the mother's body. Infants are acutely attuned to the human voice and prefer it to other sounds, and in particular, they prefer and favor the higher pitched sounds of female voices. Universally, up until about 6 months of age, infants anywhere begin making the same elaborate vocalizations that include the sounds required for any language. Ultimately, they learn what sounds and the language skills of their particular language, and from that point onward, it becomes more difficult to learn other languages. So at birth, we have the ability to learn any language, and then it's lost. Do you think that's a post-Bavel phenomenon? Do I think that's a post-Bavel phenomenon, that we have the ability to, I think that, like, we are able to appreciate and learn any language. It's like a sign of how we come into the world. I think that's absolutely right, because it was just after the flood, right? So essentially humanity was like, we're like babies. And I think that is speaking on two levels, in that, we don't come into this world with anything. We come into this world completely open. And then we take from the environment around us to give us language and to give us connection to others, right? So, you know, we see all the time that like babies aren't born with hate, or I see it all the time, I guess. You know, their babies aren't born with hate in their heart. They're not born racist, right? But they take these things from society, the snippets that they hear, and put it together in order to communicate with others and to have relationship with others. So I think that that's a post-Bavel phenomenon, that now we're charged to figure out and to do this work and to also be careful of the language that we use. I mean, Shmirat Dibor is a huge mitzvah in our tradition, to be careful with our speech for exactly this point that you're pointing out, that like other people are listening and like the younger people are listening. And this is how we construct our world, and we're trying to get from the, I would say, like using a vertical metaphor, we're trying to get from the bottom up. And when we lose sight of the worthy goal of the project, then the project will destroy, I'd say even destroy itself. Nina says, I think pluralism ends where my dignity and worth as a human being is overtly threatened. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, we have a new message. Let's check this one. Great. All right. Well, we are, thank you for giving us all an extra 10 minutes of your time to really dive into this. I can't believe we did this much in a half an hour. It's absolutely amazing. And thank you, Julie, and My Jewish Learning for creating this space for us to learn Torah together across time and space. I mean, this, like, what an amazing like zchut that we're living in such an amazing time that we're able to do this.